It's mind control, mind control, corruption of your thoughts, destruction of your soul.
Who the main interest holders, the shareholders, were, you know, Morgans, the Schiff family, Oppenheimers, Rothschilds, etc. You know, and these are all, you know, these people come from these bloodlines. Okay? Now, in 1913, I'm giving you the timeline here, y'all, so that you can go back and you can look this stuff up. Let's find out what happened. 100 years ago, there was no taxes. Okay? There was no fees, fines, and penalties. Before the 14th Amendment was passed, what were we? We were what the founding fathers or founding felons were. I'm not saying you were founding felons, but everybody was nationals. There were no citizens or 14th Amendment citizens. If you were a citizen, you were a capital C citizen. All right? But in 1913, Woodrow Wilson becomes president through his ties with illuminated individuals. And 2 days before Christmas, while most of Congress was on vacation, eating with family, hobnobbing, he gets the Federal Reserve Act voted, and Wilson made it into law. Now, again, the Federal Reserve, a central bank, pretty much works to take all value and substance. So what does the Constitution say? Constitution says that legal tender, actual money, can only be gold or silver, right? So if gold and silver can only be real substance, real value, real currency, what they pretty much did was they got you to contract. You got to understand, the Constitution didn't restrict one's right to contract. If you enter into a contract, then that's an obligation that you got to fulfill with your ass. Okay? So, with the Federal Reserve, they basically went in and got every single bank. They started with just the banks. Before the bankruptcy, before the Great Depression, before House Joint Resolution, to where they got the actual citizens to give up their gold, they started with the banks. And basically, one of the resolutions or bylaws per the Federal Reserve was to basically have every bank must issue Federal Reserve notes. In order to stop the crisis that happened before, they said we must regulate the currency and issue Federal Reserve notes. So all banks must give in their gold. And the Federal Reserve will issue you notes in exchange for equivalent to this gold. So boom, they take the gold from most of the banks. Who had most of your gold in the first place? Right? Now, they go in and start increasing the money supply. Just like now. They turn the water faucet on, increasing the money flow. Get everybody all high on using credit or using this fiat money. Just like before the whole mortgage crash, when everybody was using their mortgages to refinance like it was a credit card. I mean, this was unheard of back in the day. Pretty much back in the day, you worked hard for things, and once you had enough money to pay it off in full, you know, then you pay for it then. You wouldn't go get something on credit and then turn around and enjoy it and then, you know, pay for it damn near forever. What is a mortgage? Morgue. You see that sub? You know, in that word, morgue, mortgage, dead. You're going to be paying for the rest of your life. So the Federal Reserve Bank issues this currency. They pretty much get everybody accustomed to the flow of money, the ease of being able to get loans. If they can control the printing of money, they'll issue loans, and they'll issue loans with basically clauses that they can call these notes due whenever they want. Now, what you don't understand is every loan is still like that today. It's a due clause, which means they can call the note due within 24 hours, a margin call. So what this means is that you have to pay the damn loan off within 24 hours. And how many people do you know that can pay off all their debt in 24 hours? Now, when it gets severe and they start bringing these FEMA camps, which they already have debtor camps, if you have debt and you can't pay it off, then they're going to have you work it off. When we start playing this game of Monopoly, and what do you do when you start playing the game of Monopoly? Right? Every time it's your turn, you roll the dice, right? And what does it mean in the streets? To roll the dice. That means to take a risk, right? So every time you choose to play the game, you're taking a risk. Same with commerce. Every time you enter into commerce, if you don't know the rules in and out, you are taking a risk. with every move that you make in commerce, dealing with contracts, etc. All right? Now, waiting to pass go to collect $200. Don't that sound familiar? We wait 7 days. White man, we trust him so much, we wait 7 days, work for him, and hope that he pays us on the 8th day, right? So, in essence, you wait till you go all the way around that board, and you hoping to go around that board so that you can collect your $200. If not, you out the game, pretty much, right? Now, if you notice in the game, there's no government in the game, yet they implement taxes, right? There's no government, but they implement taxes. Who has the real power in the game? If you really look at the game, it's the bank, right? The bank issues the money, etc., right? And the bank uses fiat money just like the fiat money that we have in our system today, right? So when we left the gold standard, we were no longer backed by gold, which means that the money that you use is worth no more than these pieces of paper right here. So I'll give you an example. If you know that you had Larry the Wino sitting outside the liquor store every day, he's broke as hell and he asks you for money every time you come and see him. And one day Larry the Wino decided to say, look man, I got these pieces of paper. They're worth $1 million. Go ahead and give me your money and all your assets and take these pieces of paper and I promise I'll pay you back. It's an IOU. Pretty much it's a note. Federal Reserve note. It's a note from the government. Now, our government's been bankrupt over 5 times. And they're heading there again. It's over and over. It's perpetual. Now, if you wouldn't trust Larry the Wino with your money because you know he ain't worth nothing, he ain't got nothing, and he has a repeated history of being bankrupt, then why would you trust this government who overspends taxes, tariffs, penalties, fees, and fines with, taxation without representation? By which way do you come, etc. Now, the object of the game, again, is to bankrupt everybody, right? Now, who is the spokesman, or the mascot, so to speak, for the game Monopoly? A rich European banker, right? An old, rich European banker. So, in essence, the goal is to buy everything, bankrupt everybody, and at the end of the day, control all the real assets by way of using this fiat money that the bank can create.
Let me ask you while you waiting. How do you opt out of the game?
Well, and I'm going to go further into detail in a little bit, but
okay.
Opting out of the game is pretty much acting in proper person. You are a living, breathing, sentient, natural flesh and blood being, okay? So what this means is that you were created with unalienable rights by the Creator. Allah, Anu, Jehovah, whatever names you want to give him. Any name you give him wouldn't be correct because we wouldn't know his name anyways, because man is only mere mortals. Now, and I'm speaking of the flesh. Now, opting out of the game is pretty much deciding how to operate within commerce. I can be a surety, accommodation party, a fall guy, a dummy, who's taking it up the you-know-what for my evil twin that I didn't know exists. Or I can act as power of attorney. I can act, as power of attorney in fact or agent for, in certain capacities. So there's a difference. So I'm going to give an example here. Now, let's say Steve Jobs, for example. Steve Jobs has Apple Incorporated, right? Just as Bill Gates has Microsoft, right? So we know that Bill Gates is not Microsoft. We know that Steve Jobs is not Apple, right? Steve Jobs is Steve Jobs, Apple is Apple. But I may be granted a resolution or granted a delegation of authority to act on behalf as agent, president, secretary. We all have titles. So your title is what you might want to use instead of using your name or signature, etc. when acting in capacity. He'll use a play on words, which means I'll give an example. I may say person when I'm speaking against the brother Sonetta. But person in law can mean a juristic person, an artificial construct, or a U.S. person, U.S. citizen, corporation, all the same. But person amongst our people, again, we know that it stands for us as the human being, right? Now, amongst each other, we're okay. Except unless you probably got an agent, in your circle. But amongst each other, we're okay. You can call yourself a person all day long. And a lot of times in court, you can say, basically, my definition is defined as my everyday common language, how I use it in everyday common language. But pretty much, the person aspect is the same as black, for instance. Black amongst each other is okay. Again, we're the ones who started out using it. We're the ones who implemented it. We're the ones who pretty much came in and said that black was power, illuminated, can't be stained or changed of its original origin. And before there was light or anything else, there was dark matter. But when you go into a courtroom, or when you're amongst the oppressor, it's a different story. Black can have a different connotation to it. It stands for civil liter mortis, civilly dead, incompetent to handle your own affairs, a ward of the state, or in our language, a dumbass, game goofy. So, if I'm chilling with my people, I can say that I'm black, I can use a certain word. But when dealing with the man, literally, I don't like to say anything, really. I let my documents speak. That's why we as Moors, we like to have our documentation. Because when you're dealing with him, it needs to be put on the record. If it's set into the air, it's up in smoke. All right? You got to put these bastards on notice. All right? Constitution states that Congress has the authority only to regulate a 10-mile square radius. So that's Washington, D.C. Now, most of us have never been to Washington, D.C., let alone left our neighborhood. But did you know they have you domicile in D.C.? So instead of being domicile in the California Republic, instead of being domicile in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, etc., you're domiciled in Washington, D.C. And basically, what does that give them? Jurisdiction. So going back to the game of Monopoly, if I'm playing the game, if my pawn is domiciled on the board, that means that I'm playing, and I have to adhere to the rules. So that means the code, statutes, and legislations that are passed apply to me. But if I'm not a U.S. citizen, then they don't apply to me. If I'm not domiciled in that territory, they don't apply to me. Now, the Constitution says that for the courts to have jurisdiction, now you might want to get your pens out, brothers. For the courts to have jurisdiction, they must have a proper pleading. So that means a sworn declaration, 2 oaths, and 2 oaths from 2 witnesses. That's due process. So if they don't have these oaths, they don't follow due process, they don't have a proper pleading. They don't have jurisdiction. Now, how do we give these pigs jurisdiction on a day-to-day? Well, let's go over a traffic stop. Well, a police officer, was I speeding? I'm sorry. First of all, when he detains you by putting them lights on and you stopped, you surrendered jurisdiction. But we'll explain how to take it back, right then and there. But when you stop, you give them jurisdiction. But because we don't want to be chased down, shot at, thrown into jail, etc., we'll recognize the color of authority. Right. There's pretty colors too. The European's a colored motherfucker. Excuse my language. You know what I mean? So color of the law. He likes to use colors. All right? And that's all they are, is just color of the law. Okay? So if I'm dealing with the police officer and I give him jurisdiction by stopping, how do I take this back? Well, immediately let's go over a normal traffic stop. You roll down your window, and what does he ask you for?
License and registration.
Thank you. License and I don't care what state you're in. It's the same protocol. License and registration. So what do you give him? You give him license and registration, or a story as to why you don't got it. Right? So when you give him your license and registration, you gave up jurisdiction. So a lot of people say, well, Brother Rasul, how do I get around this? Because if I don't give him my driver's license,